So yeah, coronavirus, a unique and unprecedented challenge. I think Ria was going to touch on this.
Yeah, so I guess like everyone else, we didn't ever envision at the start of this year that we would be placed in the position that we are now. So where the experience has been a challenge operationally, I guess there is a lot to be grateful for kind of every day in terms of our health and our families. But at the beginning of the lockdown, I would describe the experience as slightly chaotic, both from an operational and client perspective, because of course we found ourselves in a very unprecedented situation where nobody had anything to compare it to. So, of course, businesses are hit. Most of our clients lie in the hospitality sector. So it was, I would say, kind of describe it as relatively heartbreaking hearing from them kind of the measures that they had to take to keep their businesses afloat. But that said, there has been some extraordinary stories in how they have pivoted and turned around to offer services and engage with their community and engage with their customers ongoing, even though, the way that they're doing it is slightly different to their normal. So we have read individually and as an agency a multitude of articles online about whether you should be marketing, whether you shouldn't be marketing. Is it sensitive to send an email from the CEO of a big corporate, or should you send kind of more direct emails from team members? Is it appropriate to sell at all? And I'm sure a lot of you have seen on LinkedIn, there is a lot of kind of debate and discussion around this. So our approach was kind of both from us as an agency, how do we approach our clients in a sensitive way that addresses what's going on, but also how we act on behalf of the brands that we represent, because we essentially form their external marketing department. So when the pandemic hit, of course, there was a lot of differentiated ways in which the brands that we manage wanted to communicate with their consumers. So there was a huge amount of brainstorming on our side about whether brands should market and how we would do it. So our answer was, of course, yes. There's a lot of stats online that speak to the amount of engagement that's been on social media since the lockdown began. So a couple to pick out would be kind of we kind of collated here, what do consumers want to see from brands on social? And 82% of people said they wanted to see brands supporting frontline staff and workers. 89% of people said they wanted to see reliable and accurate information. And 86% of people said they wanted to see brands actively helping support society's vulnerable. So we kind of took all of these learnings and applied it to our work. In addition, 80% of people wanted to see how brands were supporting their employees, which for us, I feel that we do on an ongoing basis through our Adwaiz channels. We're very active on our Instagram stories and we do a lot of team takeovers. But this was a particularly interesting one because we work with some bigger brands like Mitchell's and Butler's. They have All Bar One and Brown's Brasserie and Nicholson's Pubs, which are kind of big restaurant chains. And so we needed to understand how, from a brand perspective, we show their employees, they're behind the scenes when a vast amount of their workforce are on furlough. In addition, 70% of people wanted to see brands showcasing acts of kindness, and 58% of people wanted to see brands actively showing their experience as a business. So the way in which we had to create content for our clients or create their marketing strategy evolved quite rapidly at the beginning of the lockdown to shift from these picture perfect food experiences in the restaurant, having a great time with your friends, to showing the hardships, but the challenge, but the reward of behind the scenes and what they were doing to combat the virus and also, carry on. I don't know if there's a couple of questions at this point. I've seen one that says, in terms of consumer behaviour, from Leo, I spend a lot less now. I only buy groceries these days. Have you seen any good content that won't fall under the stay safe, we will be here for you when this crisis is over bucket? The answer is yes. Hopefully we've been behind some of it, but we will definitely come on to that in the next couple of slides. Fab. So as a collective, well, the three of us kind of summed up our thoughts around the pandemic. I've kind of explained mine, but perhaps Jono and Lauren, you can kind of
I think a consideration of mine as we entered the pandemic was how are we going to support those in our network. You know, I think people are really looking for insight and guidance at this time when, you know, I think they've been uprooted from their normal routine and their, you know, business as usual, so to speak. So to that end, we've been thinking as an agency how we can approach that, and we've come up with a vodcast concept, which we're looking to launch later this week, where we talk to stakeholders within the business, people in our network, influencers, around sort of what's keeping people creative, what's keeping people inspired in this time, and you know, and how we want to sort of collate that is to provide the basically content to put through our channels as well as theirs, and provide just a bit of interest and a bit of you know, conversation through social in this time where people might feel a bit more isolated, they might feel a bit more, you know, not sure how to approach. So that's sort of what we want to do in the next few weeks.
I think as well, I think, you know, going back to basics to understand how different consumers interact with brands and their partners. I wanted to sort of go into this in a little bit more detail, you know, how and why are brands growing in the first place? For example, you know, was that through user-generated content? So are consumers sharing, you know, their own photos, their own experiences through word of mouth, using influencers or bloggers, journalists to spread the word, and also working together, brand to brand, business to business, to share knowledge and then create an informative, engaging social platform that I guess consumers will then warm to and trust. But then we obviously adapted that as well ourselves as a business, as an agency, and we looked at how we can expand on our knowledge base. We started doing our own Instagram lives just over a week or so ago, where we sort of interview and bring on either small businesses and influencers bi-weekly, and we basically touch on a specific topic. So for example, last week we brought on an influencer and we had a chat about his top 10 tips to work and social life balance, and how he's also started his own agency during the pandemic. We just found it was very, very knowledgeable, not only for ourselves but also to the viewers involved. So having that idea where we're sharing knowledge just ended up working really well. Obviously I'll expand on this in a bit more detail in the next few slides, but kind of key points there were sort of interaction through joining together, sharing knowledge, collaborative partnerships, and also relationship building and maintaining as well.
Yeah.
So yes, so we came up with the 3 C's. These 3 key themes seem to be the most important for us when we kind of came together as a team to discuss what our brands and businesses needed to kind of continue through the pandemic. So we came up with creative, community and collaboration, and this is basically just how we feel will best supported businesses during obviously COVID-19.
I think, yeah, when we were brainstorming as a team, we wanted to understand really how we're going to reach and resonate with people at a time when I think a particularly sensitivity is something to be taken into consideration. Tone of voice has shifted. Basically, how are we going to connect with people when brands, you know, aren't necessarily attainable anymore, particularly in the F&B sector where venues are now shut? How can we provide, you know, their presence online further than, you know, as Ria was saying, posting beautiful pictures of food? So particularly with the getting creative, I think people may be thinking, you know, you still got the same core audience. Despite the shift in perspective, you still got the same people who follow your brand. So why adapt one's creative approach if it drove engagement before COVID-19? So these were the sort of reasons that we thought can sort of the why behind it.
Yeah, and we thought about this a lot as a team. I think although obviously past content was working really, really well, I think it's so important to stay relatable in this current climate. We obviously need to adapt to what's happening, and we found that, for example, giving people recipe ideas, yoga top tips, wellness activities, things that consumers can kind of save for later,
essentially. That sort of content has really worked for our brands and for businesses. So for example, giving consumers sort of places to visit around a certain hospitality section, like a cafe or hotel, would not only encourage them to potentially add to their business, but also build that relationship from them from an educational perspective as well.
I think creating content that's not only relevant to the brand, but it's also shareable. I think in a time where mental and physical well-being are at the forefront of everyone's minds, brands have an opportunity to sort of tap into that with their audience, share insightful sort of guidance, which can not only resonate with their core audience that they already have, but other people outside of that, and sort of further add to that community feeling as well.
Definitely. And I think, we've had to be a lot more forward thinking. See, things are constantly changing at the moment, and it's obviously been very sensitive as well, for everyone. So making sure that we're keeping things fresh and up to speed with the current and ever-changing climate has been so important. So we've also found that there isn't a right or wrong answer. Obviously, we have never been in this situation before, so trying all these new innovative ways has actually kind of expanded our knowledge on what our consumers like as well. So for example, obviously we want to create content that communicates, bring normality back, keep it relatable, keep it current, and also I think keeping people informed about what's currently going on within that particular brand and business is so important as well. So educating people and offering that kind of support as a brand as well.
I think a key challenge for everyone creating content at the moment has obviously been everyone's locked inside. So that has been a consistent thing for everyone, both brand side and consumer side. So creating content that is reflective of that as well has been both challenging and rewarding, because it has a real level of authenticity, which I think on social media is something that people are crying out for nowadays. I think particularly from an influence marketing point of view, you could probably attest to that, Lauren, that content nowadays it's a key to have relatable, relevant content as opposed to perhaps more aspirational, travel inspo vibes to content. You want people to be resonating with the current situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's much point. I mean, I also blog on the side, and I think content sort of gone creatively from, where do you travel to? What's your kind of lifestyle tips from going outdoors and stuff, to bringing it inside, and actually thinking, what am I doing? For example, am I creating new recipes? Am I doing DIY painting and things like that? Things that you can offer your consumers, which they can kind of do at home as well. I think really helps.
Yeah. With community, I think that's been a real key part of sort of who we are as an agency anyway, building our personal relationships with both our clients, people in our networks, influencers in particular as well. Having strong relationships with them, builds for a better future, both for both parties. But I think something to consider is, what's the best way to approach building community when, you've got your core audience that already exists, and they're your bread and butter, but then you've also got the potential for new audiences. And at a time where there's uncertainty and there's no right or wrong, how do you go about sort of not alienating the different demographics that you're trying to appeal to?
Yeah, and I think we collectively sort of under one umbrella spoke about not only also being important to build a community of consumers, but also maintaining the current ones as well. And for example, we launched several community pieces, such as we've done a virtual event, such as a bake-off. We've done virtual beer and wine tasting, community classes, yoga classes, TED Talks and seminars. They're just sort of a few of the virtual events we've kind of put on for brands and business to keep people involved, to keep people kind of learning more about the brand. I think it's so important at the moment, whilst maybe people aren't selling as much, and we'd like to think obviously people still are, and I think our brands still are, which is great, but also you know, to maintain the current audience, keep them involved, keep them entertained, and also to bring in new audiences, give them things to do at home where they're thinking, oh, what can I expect next week? Keep them on their toes and really interested and get engaged with your business.
I think especially when in the F&B sector, where perhaps you've got like, for example, a pub where, you know, you don't have the people through the doors, but people still yearn for the social connect, feeling together, you know, sharing an experience. We've been able to actually articulate that through these virtual events, really sort of building on the community elements of that's been really fun.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, you know, maintaining and obviously building those relationships with new consumers as well. I think we'd like to think that we're almost gaining long-term relationships with these people as well. So hopefully in the long run, it's a good thing as well.
Absolutely. I think using the various functionalities as well that social media provides, you know, Instagram Live has been a really fab one for us, where we've done our own with influencers in our network, but we've also been sort of doing it on behalf of our clients. It has an element where the community can actually get involved as it goes, which is, you know, really engaging. People have an opportunity to get their say hi, and sort of get involved with the activation. Sort of, whereas sort of closed community, like the Zoom effect of what we're doing now, we did a Zoom yoga class to launch Naked Biotics, which is a probiotic brand that we're working with, and it provided a really intimate experience for the influencers who are taking part, where they were able to ask questions directly and sort of have gain a bit of insight from the brands in a sort of more controlled environment. The one risk about Instagram Live is that you never quite know what's going to happen. You know, there's always lots of fun technical difficulties that may pop up here and there, but you know, that sort of adds to the fun of it, doesn't it?
Definitely. I think as well, I found that just going back to the kind of interactive Instagram stories as well, I've actually found through doing them on some of our F&B clients, doing virtual pub quizzes, getting people to interact in sort of, you can add little polls to stories and things, are really sort of keeping people informed and keeping people engaged as well.
Yeah, I think understanding how your community feels, you know, particularly about your product or your service, is a great opportunity whilst everyone is at home, you know, on their phones for the most part. You know, you can get as much exposure and as much research into how they operate, which I think is invaluable for brands.
Definitely.
I think collaborating is a key thing at the moment, because there's an overwhelming feeling of, you know, people needing to support each other. There's therefore a lot of options available for people. So how do you go about quantifying or qualifying potential collaboration opportunities?
Yeah, definitely a good question. I think coming from both obviously an agency background as well as being a blogger myself, I know that it's so important to collaborate with the right people in order to effectively expand your brand message, and obviously across more followers as well. For example, you need to look at who has previously engaged and interacted with your brand or business. Are they already a loyal customer? And work out kind of how you can work together to produce informative and worthwhile content, and that will obviously benefit both your audiences, and that's where you sort of gain an effective collaboration. So things like influencer campaigns, today's generation or on Instagram are mostly kind of well, they're today's generation journalists and storytellers, as we've written here, but I think it's so important that we're connecting with the right people, and they're very relative to and sensitive to what's going on at the moment. Another thing that we've also been involved in are charity partnerships. Jerry, I don't know if you can expand on that as well, and what we've been doing from.
Yeah, so we've got from a sort of an agency perspective, we partner with City Harvest, which is a charity based as well as globally, but we're supporting the one that's based in London, where they're providing food for the homeless from excess food that isn't being used by sort of suppliers. And that's been a sort of a challenge for us, is how can we support them in sort of more than just a monetary way, in a sort of a in a service way as well. So we've created assets, we've done an influencer campaign to raise awareness, because, you know, particularly, well, from our point of view with City Harvest, is very relevant to us. And I think that's the key thing about collaborations. It needs to tie in, it needs to have a relevant level of engagement for both parties, so that the audiences understand the partnership and therefore are invested and want to sort of be part of it themselves.
Definitely. And then lastly, obviously our business to business collaborations as well. You know, I think we're so used to almost having them as a competition, but getting involved with each other, organising giveaways, competitions, and, you know, collaborative Instagram lives and stuff that you can share your knowledge and share your experiences collectively, to in return grow your businesses together. So you're combining your audience. One, you're giving your current audience more knowledge and insight, and also two, you're gaining new people as well, who hopefully in the long run will stay for the longevity of it.
Exactly. And then we've got some case studies, which I think Ria was going to touch on.
Yeah, feel free to let us know if there's any questions thus far. But touching on what Lauren and John have said, just a couple of kind of activations that we've done with clients since the beginning of the pandemic. So we work with a company called Naked Biotics. They are a probiotic, well, a revolutionary probiotic brand in liquid format. So they sell their bottles of probiotic ongoing. And we were originally tasked with organising a relaunch for the brand, because they rebranded their entire image, all of their bottles, and kind of their ethos as well. And so we had organised a face-to-face influencer event at our office. It was going to be sort of circa 30 people. We'd have an introduction from the brand. We'd all have a shot of Naked Biotics, and then we would do some form of exercise class. However, when lockdown obviously prevailed, we had to organise this virtually. So as Johnny mentioned, we organised a virtual event, and we chose to do it through Zoom. And I know the guys spoke about the value of virtual events, but perhaps it's interesting also to consider sort of brand specific how you host it. So either if you host it on Instagram Live, you know, anyone can access, or you host on Facebook Live, you have a different audience there, because sort of if you look at the demographic between Instagram and Facebook, Instagram have kind of a younger audience and Facebook have people who are slightly older. However, we chose to do a closed event in Zoom because we thought it would be more informative, more engaging, and you'd actually have people asking questions about the brand, versus a live where anyone can join in, but it's slightly less interactive on a kind of video level. So we hosted a yoga event, and the brand gave a kind of quick intro to them afterwards, which we saw was relatively successful. We were really pleased with it. And since then, the influencers who attended have received their lockdown supply of probiotics, which they've been taking on an ongoing basis. And they've just, you know, revised their content to kind of how they were taking it to fuel their everyday lives, to how they're now taking the product to fuel their lockdown experience, which has been quite insightful. So that's one example. Another example is Create Foods, who are a health and wellness brand. They had a deli in Sydney Street in Chelsea, however that had to close quite rapidly. So we've been working with them on how to keep their audience engaged and buying their products online. So we have done kind of informative graphics. We have sent a lot of their products to one of our photographers' homes, and he's been sort of upskilling from a chefing perspective, which has been quite interesting to watch. And he has been creating kind of work from home recipes or kick up the pantry door style, you know, recipes. And we have asked our graphics team to kind of make them really pretty and beautiful, and put recipe suggestions that aren't just, you know, your normal supermarket shop, because, you know, of course we can't really access all the products we might want right now. So we've adapted in that way. In addition, they have launched a simple kind of engagement piece around the NHS. So they have launched these care package baskets that you can order off their website, but they've also launched a giveaway to nominate your NHS hero, which is a really easy metric for brands to kind of engage with charity work in a way that's really relevant to them. So they've simply said, you know, these are our care packages, please nominate your NHS hero and why they should receive one, and then the brand will pick 5 people and send it out to them. And the final example is Nicholson's Pubs. They are a pub chain, as you can imagine, and they had to shut pretty rapidly before the lockdown began, and don't have at present any means of kind of doing any delivery or anything like that. They also have a large amount of their team who aren't working, so we had to revise the way we looked at our content, which used to be, you know, pictures of pints, the pub experience, people enjoying food in the restaurant, and change it. So we have been doing some virtual pub events on Facebook with the ethos, if you can't go to the pub, we'll bring the pub to you. So we've partnered with their suppliers. So we had a gin supplier, having a whiskey supplier next week. We've had 2 beer suppliers who have jumped onto Instagram Live, and they've talked about 2 of the beers, and the audience have had the chance to ask questions. So essentially it's been a sort of virtual beer or gin tasting, which we've seen really, really good results from, because in the run up to these events, we've launched some promotional content that says, you know, tag a friend that you'd love to go to the pub with right now, and we'll see you virtually at 5 p.m. So those ones are ones we've seen really good engagement from, and kind of activations we'd like to continue.
And then transitioning from here and beyond, how should brands approach the period in which society heads out of lockdown, I think, into a new era of consumer behaviour, trends and patterns? Things aren't obviously going to be the same, and we can't predict exactly how things are going to be. So it's sort of an interesting time for brands to consider how to approach this.
Yeah, definitely. I think for us as an agency, as sort of lockdown began, we did, as I mentioned, a huge amount of creative brainstorming behind how we shift, you know, our everyday shooting, which would be at the restaurant or the pub or the bar, how we translated that to first at home so we could create it ourselves, and then how we kept it interesting. And we pretty much envisioned that the experience when we start eventually incrementally coming out of lockdown will be slightly similar, because I mean, I'm sure we all know from watching the news that there won't be an immediate switch on for restaurants or cafes or anything like that. It will likely be very incremental, and so for us we need to think about how we very sensitively market that in a way that's on brand, and that's very exciting. So some considerations that we've had in-house are summed up here. So we've put out with the old, keep on with the new, which is very fitting, I think. You know, we've seen some really nice responses to the content that we've done that are recipe videos or graphics. You know, nominate a friend who deserves XYZ. So we think that there is a lot to be taken from virtual activations, which can be carried on in the new normal. In addition, we've said to embrace the change. You know, the lockdown period is a really good time for brands to engage with their existing community and attract a new. But you can also, you have a huge amount of capacity where you have sort of more people online to conduct a lot of research in a very, very strategic way. So if we say, for example, we take a standalone restaurant in Haymarket, we work with a restaurant called Café, who are a really, really nice Indian restaurant. And they have an incredible cocktail guy and an incredible cocktail bar. It's very beautiful. But we have discussed whether we create a series of content that shows one cocktail versus another cocktail, and we ask the audience to pick their favorite or tag a friend who likes this one better than this one, in a comical and light-hearted way. But from the brand's perspective, that's almost like having a very, very cost-effective, very virtual focus group, because they can receive actionable information for them to use when we come out of the pandemic. So in this way, we say, embrace the change, embrace, the kind of insights you've taken, and move forward. In addition, we've said to sustain new relationships. I know the guys touched on it in terms of one of the things we've done has been collaborating with brands and their suppliers. And I think kind of the barrier to entry in doing brand collaborations has been almost dropped through this experience, whereas in a couple of months ago, when we would approach a brand collaboration, perhaps there'd be a bit of, not an excuse, but people might say, I'm not too busy, it might not be entirely relevant, I'm not really sure if we can do this. Since the lockdown though, every single brand collaboration that we have sort of outreached or activated has been really, really positive, and people are really, really excited to be involved, which I think is a brilliant thing and something that should really continue, because as Lauren mentioned, you don't necessarily just need to talk about what you do to your customers. If you're in the health and wellness sector, you should champion others in that sector, because you all have the same ethos. So in that way, each person is stronger. And finally, we've said, listen to your audience. So understanding trends, good and bad, is essential. Like we said at the very beginning, I don't think there is any right or wrong way to approach this period. I think it's just a continual learning piece, because you can launch something online and it might not go down very well. We did a couple of Instagram lives that had a few technical difficulties, so we've decided to do them on Facebook. So I think people are quite understanding that in this time period, not everything's going to be picture perfect, but embracing the new normal, or how everything is now, allows you to be a bit more human.
Yeah, I think I've come across a couple of Instagram lives where it's gone a bit haywire, and I think people have a bit more patience nowadays, which is quite nice. Everyone's sort of in it together and sort of trying to get the most out of the situations. So where things might not be as slick as one might like, I think it's still nice that brands are going to the effort to sort of do something for their audiences out of the box.
Fab. I think that pretty much sums our suggestions up, but if anyone has any questions, we would be very happy to answer. Diane, Ginal, maybe you have a question?
If you're still there.
Yeah, I'm still here. I haven't turned on the camera. You as a business you yourself had to, within a few days, reinvent from being central London located, going out and approach. What kind of changes have you done yourself, or anything, or are you basically following the advice that you're giving to your retailers, your restaurateurs?
Yeah, we're all working very remotely. I think the biggest challenge for us was managing the creative, because all of our brands are different. And so to shift from being able to go to the restaurant and capture everything we needed, to sending products to people's houses, sending props to people's houses, even the weather's been a barrier, because it's been lovely, but some days when we've tried to shoot, it's been pretty miserable. So that has been a challenge. Definitely, managing creative when everyone is very remotely. And that goes to sort of internal brainstorming as well. When you have, a graphic or something you want to approve for a brand, it's easy in the office to kind of go and stand by someone's desk and look at their computer and say, oh, that looks great, or could we move that there, or can we change this slightly? But when it's remote, it's slightly difficult to get that part exactly right. But we're learning as we go along.
Yeah, it is for all of us. We had a question from Rasmus. Do you have any suggestions for how to start up a social media strategy from scratch for a new business in the current climate?
Yeah, I think a key thing that sort of we take into consider every time we think talking to brands is to really have a consolidated strategy and understand what's the value with each post. Where some people may think social media is just uploading a photo. We tend to think of it more of a content piece. So aligning your creative and your social media strategy to really provide value, information, education, and ultimately inspire the people looking at your content to engage. So when we're talking to brands, we say, think of perhaps 4 or 5 key focuses that sum up your brand's approach to marketing, and gear your creative and your social media strategy towards those 4 or 5, so you have a bit of consistency and people get that insight and really understand what you are about as a brand. I think that's probably one of the most important things. And also another thing to consider as well, I'd say, is community management as well. sort of being very present as a, you know, essentially humanizing your page. So if people have questions or comment or engage, you're there to, you know, answer that and to sort of be very present in terms of the industry as well. You can go through hashtags, location tags, other brands that you feel perhaps resonate with your audience, and tap into them there. Basically, do whatever you can to hack the algorithm and basically organically engage with your target audience.
And consider the why as well, I think is quite important. So especially nowadays, where if you're showing what you do, you know, talk about why you're doing it. I think that is one of the most engaging things, especially as a small business. If you're just starting up on social media, people want to understand why you're doing X, Y, Z, and it doesn't have to be fully fledged reason. It could be totally personal.
Absolutely. And then to sort of answer your second question, where I say 4 to 5 points, one should keep in mind. For example, if it were a restaurant, we'd probably suggest one of the points being the food offering, another one being the drinks offering, the location, customer experience, and the team. For example, obviously those chop and change subject to the brand and the offering and who you're trying to reach and how. But yeah, take into the sort of the key things that you're trying to promote, and making them the focus of your content. Did anyone else have any other questions or thoughts?
I had another one, follow-on question here for in the forum today. I can see there's a quite different, diverse kind of companies, from professional service firms, legal firms, banks, through to retailers as well. If you are a professional service firm, can you take some lessons learned maybe from your experience in the more hospitality, food, drinks related industry? Anything you can suggest, or you would say that is not our business, maybe we should find someone else to do it?
I think the community piece is applicable for any type of business, really. You don't need to have, you know, the creative is specific to the brand. You can have a beautiful product and it's easy to take a nice photo of it or something, but the community element is applicable to anyone. Even us as a company, we do community management on our page. We talk about our team members, we talk about what we're doing internally. So for a professional services company, you know, talking about, you know, how you engage with your customers, why you're doing X, Y, Z. Do you have any initiatives? You know, they don't need to be charity initiatives. They could just be team yoga or something like that you're doing remotely. All of that stuff allows you to humanize your brand, you know, especially while now we're in lockdown, and, you know, seem more approachable from a consumer perspective. I think it's also a great way to attract talent, because, you know, your kind of digital channels aren't just for engaging your audience. It's also a really wicked way for you to attract people that might want to work with you moving forward. So the more proactive you are and more present you are, especially on LinkedIn, I think it is really good.
Good. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Now is really a good time to pop them in the chat function to do it.
We got one from Per, who has said, have you seen your hospitality customers focus on regulars during the COVID, or attempting to sort of reach as wide as possible? I think, honestly, it's a bit of both. I think where we've been really trying to drum into the strategy, the community element, that essentially does pull together both aspects of existing customers and people who have an interest in the brand's, you know, ethos, that may not exactly like know of the brand already. So it's been a bit of both, to be honest, trying to get or create an inclusive environment for basically new and existing customers to discuss and engage with the content.
Yeah, simple way to do that is just to share tag photos that people might have shared of their experience. We noticed on All Bar One's page, when the lockdown first hit, a lot of people were sharing, you know, drinks or meals out with friends and saying, you know, reminiscing of a great time. So we were really quick on that to share it from the brand's perspective and say, you know, we look forward to having you back soon, in a very natural way. And then, yeah.
We've had another question from, sorry,
go on. Go ahead, John.
After you, please, go now, please.
So, Sini asked, you talked about collaborations. Any tips regarding how to identify potential partners you could collaborate with? What things to consider when approaching them?
I think It's been an interesting one because we've been looking at partnering some of our clients together when they've got a similar ethos. And I think the key thing is that they're singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of their ethos and mission. You know, a number of our wellness brands we've sort of introduced, and they're really keen on sort of exploring how they can create a narrative with the campaign. So we're creating one at the moment with Cruace and Naked Biotics. Both of which have elements, well, Naked Biotics particularly is a champion of gut health, and Create Food has a gut health related product as well. And, you know, it's taking that opportunity and finding out the why, as Ria was saying, sort of expressing the why and what are people going to resonate with both brands about. I think choosing organic conversations as a key metric win over perhaps reach and big numbers is probably the better, because you want it to look slick and you want it to be authentic to your brand.
Cool. Jane Fowler's asked, we're about to launch a new website. Would you wait or go ahead and get it out there now?
Do it now.
Yeah, definitely do it now. Yeah. You've got everyone sitting at home, more or less. You know, everyone's at their computers. Now is the time to reach people and engage with them. And if you've got something, you've got a product that, you know, you're ready to launch, absolutely go ham and get it out there.
I think that's the thing as well. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about stripping things back to basics, and why did you start your brand in the first place? It's because you want to inform people about it and tell people your story. And for that point, obviously launching a new website now, yeah, I think, you know, as well, it is a great time. I think that's the thing. A lot more people do have a lot more time on their hands and are willing to build those relationships with new brands, potential new brands, and current ones as well. So yeah, definitely.
You could even release it and say, we are launching it now because of XYZ. We think it's a great time. And that might be a very human way to sort of launch your website and say to people, you know, you chose to do it now because you think, you're hoping your customer base will be, you know, more available to read it and engage with it.
Yeah, I can say firsthand, I've been a sucker to many social media ads, and I've since bought some lovely rings, which I didn't have before the lockdown. But since I've had more time, I've been on social media, and I've actually had the chance to engage with content that's in front of me and actually think about it and think, do I actually want that? And I actually have. And I think the same goes for, you know, a website where, you know, you're expressing your brand and your service. It's a fantastic opportunity to sort of get it out there now. Yeah.
You could even go one step further and launch the website and then ask people for feedback. Ask people in your audience, you know, we've just launched our new website. You know, the customers keep the website running, or the customers are the ones that are going to be using it. What do you think?
There was a question from Gavin. He says, how do you approach supercharged social media when the company delivers technical and management services, R&D products, etc.? Any tips on that?
Yeah, I think much the same as we kind of suggested earlier, to showcase the product, the ethos, the people behind the brand. Definitely the development process, I think, would be very engaging for your target audience, because they don't just want to see the finished picture. They want to understand, if they're invested in you, they will want to understand how you work and what the process is behind that.
Yeah, I think really hammering home an ethos-driven strategy, where we've talked about focus points. For example, a restaurant might be the food and the drink offering or whatever. You can also apply that with your ethos and key things that you champion, which you can then build relatable content around, from which you then becomes shareable, and then you're reaching a community in that way.
And LinkedIn might be a great platform for that as well, sort of behind the scenes from your team. Doesn't need to necessarily be a brand page that shows your company updates. I actually think it'd be more empowering if your team members are sharing, you know, insight into what they're doing at work and why it's interesting, or maybe a great call they had with someone, or a project they're working on, or some wicked feedback that can be shared by one of your team. And then from a brand perspective, you can reshare it on your brand page, and it looks very, very, you know, it looks authentic, but also looks very engaging. This is kind of something something I annoy our team with every day, but also something we recommend to our clients.
Gavin, he adds on to it, how about the IP? I'm not quite sure what he means by that. Maybe you do.
Not entirely.
Is that intellectual property, or what do you mean, Gavin?
I guess he means the IP of his clients and how he showcases that.
I'm meaning about the IP of my products and services, because we deal in tens of millions of intellectual property. We need to let people understand what we're doing, what we can deliver, but we can't really tell them everything we do.
Yeah.
Because it's massive amounts of money. It's put at risk. So there's a reason I asked the way I asked my question.
I guess you'd have to show a sneak peek or a snippet of what you're doing without giving too much away. But one thing you could also do is actively engage and share trending industry material that's relevant, and give your kind of thoughts or feedback or response to it. So if there's an article that comes out that would be relevant for you guys, you could just write a really quick paragraph reflection to it and then host that on your social media, because that looks, you as a company look ever more informed in what's going on.
Yeah.
I think also testimonials from sort of success stories as well, where you've supported a client. You know, you don't have to necessarily give away any finer details, but they can provide their insights of your service, so it's more authentic as well to the viewer.
Okay. At the moment, we use like white papers and case studies, but they have to be very vague.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gavin. I can maybe also add to it in terms of the whole thing about engaging, finding your allies, finding your partners, finding a community. Well, that's where you have all the fellow members of the chambers who are all in the same position one way or the other, and the willingness to help each other right now is exceeding what I experienced before. People are really upfront about it. I can only encourage you all to get in touch with your respective chamber, and if you are not already connected to us, get in touch with me, get in touch with Emma from the Finnish chamber, or Kure from the Norwegian chamber, or whoever you have in your association networks, because there is a willingness and for sure can connect. I just know how many times I've been back to Jono and Rhea and colleagues over time for others who've asked for support or vice versa. That is still there.
Definitely. No, thank you very, very much.
Good. I don't see more questions, and I think it's about time to wind up this anyway. We're getting to the top of the hour. I'd really like to thank Rhea, Jono, and Lauren very much for this insightful webinar presentation. This was recorded, and we will be sharing the recording in due course shortly. There will also be a follow-on email to all of you. There will be more events. I can also encourage you to get in touch with us all from the Chambers Association. I suspect Adwaiz as well have some things coming up in their pipeline and other things. So keep following them and tracking them too. And I'm sure they'll be happy to assist also practically for any support, or maybe engage with their business on how to help your business. So for us, thank you very much. And shall I leave it with you for final a few words, Rhea?
Yeah, no, just a huge thank you to Gunnar and Björn and Henrik, and also to the Norwegian and Finnish chambers also for having us. Yeah, feel free to drop us a line with any further questions or queries. We'd be very happy to ask. But thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.